This week on Security and Compliance Weekly, we're going to have a roundtable discussion about what it means to call yourself an InfoSec professional. Who gets to make that claim, who doesn't, and why? I'm pretty sure we've got some differing opinions on this topic, not only on what it means to be working in InfoSec, but also what it means to be a professional. So fasten your seatbelts, put both hands on the wheel, and join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
And welcome to episode number 32 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on June 16th, 2020. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Matt Alderman, Mr. Josh Marpet, and Mr. Scott Lyons. Gentlemen, welcome.
You guys wanted red, I bring you scarlet.
You asked for it, you got it. And it's all about the red today. We're going to have a group discussion today just amongst us guys, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. But let us get a few announcements out of the way, and then we'll jump into it. Join us, Security Weekly, at InfoSec World 2020, which is coming up next week, June 22nd through 24th. And of course, it's now a fully virtual event. Security Weekly listeners will save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. To get the discount, visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the registration button. You register, you get the discount automatically. And just as an announcement, Security and Compliance Weekly will not be broadcasting. Neither will Security Weekly, I don't believe, next week because of InfoSec World. Second announcement, we are looking for high-quality guest suggestions and topic suggestions for all of our podcasts to fill out our Q3 recording schedule. I think we're actually pretty full, so it's those other shows that are needing help. You can submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and submitting the form. We review the suggestions at least on a monthly basis, and we will reach out to you once we've reviewed them. All righty then. So every once in a while, we like to have a group discussion because we like to talk about topics rather than have an interview. And this topic we've been bouncing around for a little bit over a month now. And I'm going to pass the mic metaphorically to Josh here in just a moment and let him sort of set up the conversation. But just the question came up, and I think it started with a little Twitter rant by somebody, and it blew up into something. It was Twitter, it was Facebook, I'm not sure which. But this whole notion of what is an InfoSec professional, who has the right to call themselves an InfoSec professional, who doesn't, and of course. We like to, on our show, sort of break things down, and I like to personally begin with defining our terms. So before we can discuss what is an InfoSec professional and who gets to call themselves that, I think it is important that we kind of spend a little bit of time talking about the terms. And also because we're Security and Compliance Weekly, I'm curious, and hopefully we'll explore this in our chat today. How does this view, or the viewpoints of what is an InfoSec professional, how does that impact the silos that we're trying to so hard to bring together? The whole notion of there's a security hacker community, there's also this compliance assessor auditor type of community, and there's probably a few others out there as well. And is part of us coming together understanding our terminology, defining our terminology, and perhaps expanding our definitions of what we ordinarily think of when we throw around terms like InfoSec and InfoSec professional. So I'll shut up for a minute, and I'll let Josh sort of paint the picture of how we got here and launch the discussion. So Josh, take it away.
So I got to say, you set it up perfectly, and I love that. Thank you. Because, when you start talking semantics, when you start talking about the definition of the terms, that's literally where this discussion went. And so I should back up. Sorry.
Whoa. Why are we talking antivirus?
What?
You said semantic.
Oh, stop it. I'm going to hit you so hard.
You beat me to the punch, Jeff.
Oh, my God. I was like, what, huh? And then you said semantic. I'm like, oh, my God. That is not going to be the rolling joke here. Okay, let's be clear, because the word semantics will be pushed around quite a bit.
All right.
So here's the deal.
I'll shut up.
So here's the deal. This started a couple months ago. I saw a couple things on Twitter. If you don't have a CVE, you're not a hacker. And if you don't have tattoos, you're not a hacker. And if you don't have whatever. And it's like, do I need to wear the Guy Fawkes mask, the hoodie, and the gloves to type? Because the gloves make it very difficult to type. Let's be clear. Okay.
Well,
unless you get one of those keyboards with the big keys for the kids, they make it so much easier. So the question is, what is a hacker? What is an InfoSec professional? Are those the same things? And then you start expanding, like from InfoSec professional, is a compliance person part of security? Is a compliance person not? Is a compliance person or a sales engineer or a salesperson that's got a technical bent? Where are the limits? Where are the boundaries? And before we get into that, in some professions, there are boundaries. There are formal boundaries that are set. To be a licensed real estate broker, you have to have a license. You have to have gone through the course, take the test. You're actually a licensed with a bond or a insurance real estate broker. And so that is the way they do it. Okay. But for us, for InfoSec professionals, there's no licensure. And that's a good and a bad thing. Let's be clear, in my opinion. But I want to stop right there and open it up to everybody. Does that make sense as a differentiator? We do not have licensure. We do not have the test, if you will, the board certification for a doctor or the Series 7 for a broker or things like that.
True. Very true. But I think if we want to talk semantics for a second, I mean,
antivirus, what? I can't resist.
You labeled this InfoSec professional. Some would say, well, why not a CyberSec professional? We have semantics within even the definition of what is InfoSec versus CyberSec versus variations of this. And we can probably get into this when we get into the discussion a little bit. But here's a perfect example, just from my history. When I kind of crossed over from security to compliance, I was part of the information protection team at National City Bank. Okay. Information protection not only owned what we would classically call InfoSec, they also owned the third-party vendor management program due to Gramm-Leach-Bliley compliance. That's where my crossover happened. We weren't even called information security. We weren't even called a compliance team back then. This was early 2000s. And so when we're talking semantics here, guys, there's probably even more kind of base foundational discussions we have to have about what is the classification or definition of information security maybe versus cybersecurity, because I see the terms interchangeably, but I don't agree necessarily that they are interchangeable terms.
I love that. Oh, Matt, that's beautiful. And actually, Jeff, I want to put you on the spot slightly. In the Facebook discussion that I had, you broke in and not broke in, you became part of it. And you said, there was something about ComSec. And you were like, well, that's communication security. But when I was, young and, 5,000 years ago, it was computer security. So I'm not making fun of your age. I realize, when you were young, rocks were soft, dirt was young, no big deal. But do you remember you actually said you were going to go look up what ComSec stood for? Did you ever get a chance to look that up? Jeff?
I might have. That was a long time ago.
It was May. It was May. Come on.
Which was a long time ago. I mean, it's Groundhog Day. Over and over again. Hold on. Well, come back to me because I've got the glossary right behind me.
Oh, good. Okay, so you're going to look that up. So basically, the idea is we actually had to break this down. And Matt, you hit right on the first part of it. What is information security? Is compliance part of it? Is sales engineering part of it? There's all different possibilities here. Absolutely correct. And your point about is cybersecurity and InfoSec, information security, are they the same thing? Oh, dear God. Now you're opening up so many different things that we need to talk about. But then the idea of professional. There's some people that say that professional is anybody that gets paid to do something. If you rake leaves and get paid, you're a professional leaf raker or a landscape person, or what is it, landscape engineer. If you're getting paid to pick up garbage, you're a professional sanitation engineer. If you're getting paid to protect things in the digital world, you're a professional in information security of some sort or other. And I'm just talking about the professional part of it for a moment. So if we go with the idea of you're employed in an information security role, that's professional. Is that okay to say without licensure? But is that all right to start off with? Does professional sound reasonable to everybody? See, I'm actually trying to come to a conclusion here. I'm not just trying to foster the argument. I find the argument fascinating.
Some people would say without some level of certification, can you be classified as a professional? I'm not one of those, by the way. I'm just saying some will push back on without some level of certification. Are you a professional? And again,
certification or licensure? I'm sorry, I'm just going to be clear. I just want to be clear. Certification or licensure? Which are you talking about?
Licensure, I agree with, right? Most engineering disciplines don't need licensure, right? There is a concept of a professional engineer, and there's some licensure for certain engineering disciplines. But in general, you don't need a license to be considered an engineer. And a number of us came out of the engineering disciplines from college. I did. Into the space. So licensure wouldn't make sense there. If you're going into the legal profession, the medical profession, you're going to go be a stockbroker. There are licensing requirements, to your point, Josh. So I'll separate that. Now the question is there some level of certification or degrees to be considered a professional? Now we open an interesting can of worms.
Okay, so even in the word professional, we're having problems. We've got licensure, we've got certification, we've got degree. It goes right along with certification, right?
Hell, we might as well throw like insurance in there if we're going to be talking about that.
Oh, yes. Do you need to be insured for error and omission? Otherwise, you're not a professional. And the IRS has a definition of a professional, self-directed, and there's a couple of other things. But basically that they can direct themselves to do the work. What about when you're in a SOC? You're heavily other directed. You're heavily following the leader of your team, for example. Is that a professional? There's all sorts of questions here. And
professional has such a loose term about it. It's like trying to box it in just doesn't do it justice, right? So you can make the argument that if you're getting paid to do information security or cybersecurity or some form of security that you're a professional, but in reality, it may be that either you're in a long-term position or you're just doing a short-term gig dabbling in security. I mean, let's be honest. How smart do you really have to be to run a vuln scan, right? And then really, how smart do you have to be to say that vuln scan is a pen test? So when you're trying to really define... Oh, yeah. Sorry, I had to. When you're trying to define being a professional in information security, cybersecurity, right, it all comes down to a case-by-case basis and what you feel is the definition of being a professional, right?
So
Wouldn't that
I think Patrick
sociological
got it right.
norms?
I think Patrick got it right. professional equals gets paid. And so let me take that one step further. I could be paid from a salary, or if I'm out doing research and bug bounties, I'm getting paid. That's a pretty good professional definition. If somehow you're getting paid for the work you're doing, you're a professional. We'll leave it at that.
All right, so let's hold it at that. Let's say, and Martin Fisher said, I prefer the obscenity style definition. I know an information security professional when I see one, and I think that's cute. But it was if you get paid, you're a professional. So for the moment, let's leave it at that as the sort of the broadest possible definition. Is that okay? We can always narrow it down, but can we leave that as the broadest possible definition?
All right. So Josh, I got the glossary in front of me. What am I looking up again? ComSec. So, interestingly enough, ComSec by itself as a single term is not listed in here. There is ComSec account, ComSec aid, ComSec boundary, ComSec chipset, ComSec control program, ComSec custodian, ComSec equipment, ComSec facility, ComSec incident, and so on and so forth.
Just for Jeff, just for curiosity, what is the glossary that you're using? Can you show us?
Is it on screen?
Yes, it is. National Information Systems Security Glossary. So this is actually for official use only. You're showing us an FOUO document, you bad person.
Yeah, I know. It's horrible. I'm allowed to.
Technically speaking, this is official use, so guess what?
Oh, well, then we're okay.
I'm officially using it, yes.
So the definition of ComSec isn't in there?
Not in and of itself. ComSec is simply government vernacular for communication security, which is different from CompuSec, which is computer security. So if we're shifting over to the if we're switching over to defining what is InfoSec, and we're starting with ComSec, one thing I would point out, there's an underpinning behind a lot of the conversation here today already, and what I saw in your Facebook chat, that InfoSec is somehow part and parcel, is that the term, to working with computers, working with networks, working with technology. And I would just like to point out that when I began my InfoSec career at NSA a million years ago, it wasn't computers. It was radios and communications equipment and things that created codes and ciphers. So it was a little black box.
I was expecting chisels and stone tablets. But
well, there was that too.
Sorry,
and I worked in the manual crypto systems office, which was paper product. We were doing good old fashioned ciphers, one-time pads. And
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. If a cryptographer uses computers to perform cryptography, but isn't doing their work around the computer, is that still an information security professional? They're working on cryptographic algorithms, they're working on the math, if you will, but they're not actually working on a computer system, a program or whatever to perform that cryptography. They're working on the mechanism of cryptography. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Well, I think you're highlighting the point that I'm trying to make is that there's a presumption that InfoSec means working with computers at some level. And I'm saying, I got into an argument with somebody on, I think it was Twitter a couple years ago, because they said something about the internet invented InfoSec. And I'm like, I'm sorry, no, it didn't. I was doing InfoSec long before the internet came along. And, but I think that's a perception that is part of what we're trying to deconstruct here, hopefully with our conversation, is that InfoSec doesn't automatically mean you're working with computers, and you're and in particular, and I think the next 800-pound gorilla is it doesn't necessarily mean hacker, which I bring up to say at some point in this discussion, I hope we will try to draw a distinction between being a hacker and being somebody else in this industry, whatever we end up defining it to be. You don't have to be a hacker to be called an InfoSec professional. Just throwing that out there. But ComSec is communication security, and it mostly had to do with, it had to do with telegraph machines, Morse code. It had to do with radios.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I will point out two things. Number one is that computer was a job description before it was a term about an object. Yep. And number two is that the Caesar cipher is from Caesar, which was a little bit before computers.
Only a couple thousand years, Josh.
Yeah, details. So, okay, so we've got...
But it's something I didn't...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Final thought, and I'll let
Please.
you guys have at it again. But my initial knee-jerk reaction, which I think I said to you maybe in chat, but part of me takes it seriously. I mean, I got my start in my career working for the Department of Defense in the field of information security. I feel like that justifies me calling myself an InfoSec professional. One could argue that if you're not working professionally in the field of InfoSec, which I did, you don't have the right to claim that you're an InfoSec professional. Not saying I take that stance, but I could see making that argument.
Can I ask you to hold that as a position for just a minute? I want to do devil's advocate to it because I think it's a great point. What about somebody who's in compliance, who deals with auditing information security on a however you define it? We're not going there just for a minute. You get the idea. Auditing information security practices and controls on a daily basis. What about a sales engineer who is there to help configure, build solutions, architect, explain, etc., but doesn't necessarily administer those solutions that they design? And what about somebody that is, for example, working in InfoSec, as you put it, professionally? What about somebody who is a hobbyist and has learned how to do a lot of these things, how to run a pen test, but has never done it for money yet? Would they be the last one, by the way, I would classify as an InfoSec hobbyist or amateur. Once they start getting paid, they're a professional. So I'm sort of using that definition. But for the first two, a compliance analyst / auditor and a sales engineer, what would you say about that?
I think you can make the argument that if they're working in the industry and especially on the vendor side of things, there's so many moving parts that makes a company successful. Anybody that's working within the context of that business, of that vendor or that organization that does professional services, I think you could claim to be an InfoSec professional because you're getting paid and you're working in the field of InfoSec.
And I mean, there are people that have, in that Facebook thread that I started on, I think May 4th. May 4th. So it's been a little bit. Started talking about, you need to have a very scarred liver. You need to have a leather hat. There's all kinds of jokes that went in there too.
Yeah, you might get there. You might have a scarred liver. You might have a lot of tattoos. You don't have to. I have the scarred liver. I don't have any tattoos.
And Wim Rems brought up a great point. He brought up ethics. He said, if you don't have an ethical framework that you're based around, you might be a professional because you get paid, but you have to be ethical about it, or you're a criminal, and you're not an InfoSec professional. You're just a criminal with some technical knowledge.
So you're saying ethics defines the different type of hat that you wear. Is that right?
You're talking white hat, black hat? Yes.
Yeah. The different type of hacker hats, right? If you will.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. But again, I think hacker is a subset of this broader topic known as InfoSec professional. There are defenders, right? And there are people who work on the attack side.
Right.
Hackers have traditionally been moved to the side of on the attack front, right? They're active, they're testing, they're looking for holes in your defenses. And then you have a whole set of people that are trying to defend their networks. Hacker is a subset of this broader term, so I don't want us to go down necessarily the hacker rat hole per se, because it is a subset of this kind of broader topic. And Josh, to your point around compliance and audit professionals, they are in the business of helping protect information and therefore fall under my kind of InfoSec professional definition.
Absolutely, we're on the same page, but I want to bring out a couple of other points. I know we're running short on time, but Wim actually brought out evangelism. If you've got a security evangelist who talk about security topics, but they don't necessarily have their hands dirty in the field anymore, are they InfoSec professionals? That's a question. And then Steve Werby, this is great stuff. Like, we had some fantastic people talking about this. Said, if somebody earns all their income from a bug bounty, is ethical, basically sells those bugs back to the company so that they can fix them. Is that an InfoSec professional? But then the next day they wake up and use the exact same framework of work that they do and then sell those to nation states to hack those companies. Are they no longer an InfoSec professional because now they're a criminal? They're doing exactly the same thing. They've just switched who they sell those vulnerabilities to. It's very interesting.
Those questions are framed in a context, from what I'm hearing, that an InfoSec professional, by their definition, is a hacker, is somebody that's hands-on keyboard and actually doing something. Where I would say, in the response to the question, no, you don't have to be hands-on to. Well, I can answer two ways. One, you don't have to be hands-on the way that they're envisioning it, but two, I would, to back it up a little bit, just define hands-on. If I'm an auditor, assessor, compliance person, I'm not hands on the keyboard like doing configurations. I'm shoulder surfing, letting somebody else bring up the configurations and trying to determine if they're accurate or not, or if they're following their standards or not. So hands-on is kind of a relative term. I was trying to think of an analogy that would work here, and what I've come up with so far is, if you think of like home construction or building construction, think of all the different specialties that go into a typical construction project. You got people putting up the framing, you got people doing the finishing, you've got the plumbers, you got the electricians, you got the HVAC people, you've got the architect, you got the people that are the site managers that can interpret the architectural drawings, the blueprints, and turn around and tell the people that's where you need to put the board and stuff like that. And there's back office and lesser roles that support all those different functions. Is that not a somewhat good analogy? And throw it out if you don't like, but there's lots of different roles and groups that go into home construction, and I think most, if not all of them, would say, "Yeah, I build homes."
Right.
It would be great if they actually built
in the builder profession. Yeah.
Or they're in the building profession.
Yeah, no, it would be funny to see if the CISSP took the route of building a house, right? And what I'm saying is that more oftentimes than not, when we're trying to define and describe services that we're putting forward, Josh, you can jump in here. We use the breaking into a house model. Right. So we have businesses that ask us, hey, can you do a penetration test? Can you do a vulnerability assessment? Can you ensure that we're up to code? We're up to compliance, right? It's the house model that we go to, right? So port knocking is walking around, making sure the windows don't open, right? Jiggling the front door handle, make sure that, it doesn't open, that it's locked, right? Versus the rest of the house being built itself. So there are a lot of analogies that can be drawn here. And then when you're talking about houses on a street, now you've got networking involved, right? So that's an interesting point that you bring up. But what I really want to key in on is the conversation that's going on over in Discord right now. And if you're not a part of the Discord, please go join, right? Tuesdays at noon, get in the Discord and join the conversation with us. But what's being said over there is that the level of professional is defined by who pays you. Right? So if you're being paid by a company to secure their systems, it's a white hat. If you're being paid by a company to break into another company, it's black hat, right? Like it all comes down to money, right? But the problem is that it's not just money, it's also ethics, back to what we were just talking about. Right? How does the money plus the ethics equal the output or equal the outcome of where you land on the spectrum of whether you're a malicious InfoSec professional or if you're a non-malicious InfoSec professional and you're really out to help people?
So thank you, Scott, for pointing out that I'm in HD this week. I have changed my camera. I just got on the Discord and started looking through it.
I said, oh God, Josh in HD.
But I will tell you that May was a long time ago this year. Thanks, Sam. I think that there's there's a lot of great discussion on the Discord. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We're trying not to gatekeep the field. we're trying to get, and Alex Hammerstone from TrustedSec had a great point. He's like, they get asked all the time, how big should our InfoSec team be at this client? And the answer is, well, define InfoSec and we'll tell you how many people you should have on it. Is the attorney that deals with your privacy issues part of your InfoSec team? The compliance people we already talked about. This is a huge question. And I don't think we're getting an answer today. Please understand. We're not going to get an answer on this. But we really want, and we knew we wouldn't get an answer, let's be honest. We really just wanted to open the discussion up. And by the way, just to be clear, I took that Facebook discussion, I made it public to the world, and it's in the wiki on the wiki.securityweekly.com. If you go to this episode, which is, which episode is this? Is this episode
32?
32, thank you. So
and
in episode
I would
32,
also challenge you to drop the link in the Discord server.
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. Hang on. I'm still reading the Discord, but I can just drop the link in. There we go.
Well,
the link is now in the Discord server.
The number of people, when you're talking about the number of people for a security program, right? The general rule of RIST that I've heard is 1 for every 1,000, right? So 1 security person for every 1,000 employees, right? Is that what you guys are hearing? Have you heard that?
If you're, I've never heard numbers like that, and for smaller companies, less than 1,000 people,
that means they have nobody.
They have no one, which is very often the case, actually.
Most often the case. Let's be honest. Yeah.
Well, hold on there. You can't say that because now you're talking about what vertical are they serving, right? If you're serving a banking vertical or you're serving a healthcare vertical, right? You have compliance regimes that say that you need to do such and such at certain points throughout the year. Right? Like everybody's favorite, I know it's Jeff's PCI, right? If you're a small bank, you have to hit PCI in some way, shape, or form. If you are a small merchant, right, you are affected by PCI whether you know it or not, right? So
sort of. Banks,
so
for all intents and purposes, don't do PCI. But keep going.
Can I just stop everybody for 1 second and say, oh my God, the Discord is blown up. This is awesome. Like, people should be on Discord, read it. I'm having so much fun reading the Discord now. Like, sorry, it's just, there's so many people discussing this. It's awesome.
The conversation is very relevant in that, we're having this little debate on, if I work for an InfoSec company, does that make me an InfoSec professional? And the answer is not necessarily, right? You could be a sales guy. You might be a sales professional. I'm not sure you're an InfoSec professional. Most of the sales guys I know anyway.
Hold on, Matt. If you're doing sales, you know the security principles, period. Right? Otherwise, you're not doing sales.
You may not know all of them. I'll give you true. But again, are they really InfoSec professionals? I don't know. Sales engineers probably have to know a lot more about the tech and the capabilities and associate those to problems that they should know about. So sales engineering is one of the discussions in here. But, you've got HR folks, you've got accounting folks, you got other people. Their primary is maybe financial or HR. It's not necessarily InfoSec, even though they work for an InfoSec company. So just interesting debate.
So could we make the distinction that if you are inside of a business and you are touching systems deemed to be InfoSec, that you are an InfoSec professional? Could we make that delineation, Matt?
I don't know. Maybe.
So let me put this to you. Would you expect somebody in HR to touch a vulnerability scan?
No.
Right? So therefore HR, not part of InfoSec, right?
Yeah.
Would you expect legal, right? Here's a real gray area. Would you expect legal to take a look at logs or have access to Splunk or some sort of SIEM?
No. Yeah, I think you have to be hands-on with it. Sales professional is a gray area, though, because they kind of have their hands on, but I'm not sure I would classify them as InfoSec professionals per se. That's the gray one.
Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll continue the discussion and try to transition at least a little bit into how does this translate to how do I get into the field? Why would you want to get into the field? And paths forward given the complexities. So hold your horses. Keep chatting on Discord. We'll be right back.